Thank you very much for the introduction. Indeed, we'd all like to prefer to be on the polo pitch at this time. My name is René Biel. I'm Managing Director of Beaufort Global, which is an investment asset management development firm based in Dubai. We've been part of the landscape for the past decade. So it's a great pleasure to be here. And first of all and foremost, congratulations to Ras Al Khaimah and AHIC for staging such a milestone event. If I can introduce or ask our distinguished panel to come to stage, we have Rabih from Ròya, who will do their own introductions in a second. Then as well, we have Amit from High Point. We have Harry Johnson from Beaufort. And then we have Naim Maddad from Gates Hospitality. So please welcome the distinguished team. Now, I know we've all been waiting for the best of last session. You've been dying to hear, after a long day, all about asset management. Asset management has, in the past decade, gone through an evolution where it was a pretty general practice as institutional levels. However, a decade further, we're seeing more of a general acceptance of asset management, not only at institutional, but also property level. However, there is still a lot of debate as to what is asset management. Before we tap into that, I'd like to have the distinguished panel introduce themselves. So Naim, please.
Thanks, René. Naim Maddad, Chief Executive of Gates Hospitality. We investors, developers, and we have various silos, invest, operate, and advise, predominantly hotels, resorts, food and beverage, and spas. Thank you.
Harry Johnson, Chairman, Beaufort Global Partners. We do advisory services for owners, covering the full spectrum of development, concept through to completion, execution, and asset management. Here in Dubai, in various jurisdictions throughout the world.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Amit Nayak. I'm the Managing Director of High Point. We are a private equity development and asset management firm. We run a family office for a group of high net worth individuals. Our geographies are GCC and Europe. And we develop our own assets and work in the private equity space, predominantly in hospitality.
Rabih Feghali, I'm a Vice President at Ròya. We are the largest hospitality consulting firm in the region. This year we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, so
congratulations.
For 20 years. We do a whole bunch of things, including development advisory, including development advisory, and specifically on asset management, we have about 34 assets that we look after in some of the major cities here in the region, as well as abroad.
Thank you. Now, asset management, I can assure you that every single person in the room is affected by professional hospitality, asset management, specifically real estate. Now, we've been deliberating actually for the past 2 hours on this session, which is going to be for 20 minutes, and we've had, again, 5 different interpretations what is asset management, and this is from different viewpoints. So we'll try to drill this down and give you, from our perspective, or from the different perspectives, what asset management represents, or what is actually. So, Naim, start with you. What is asset management for you?
Look, for me, it's very clear. Asset management really is about looking at the balance sheet rather than a P&L. And by that, I'm talking about 10, 20 years return on investment and IRR and the likes. Equally as important for me, asset management is making sure that the asset as a whole is very well maintained, looked after, and sweated throughout its life, its journey. Equally as important, asset management for me is about bridging the gap in between the operators and the investors and making sure that they do have one entity in the limelight to represent.
Harry, do you agree with that definition?
I agree with it. I'd also like to add, you just saw from the previous panel that nowadays the asset can be quite complicated. The different component parts represent value potential, revenue potential, and need to be aligned and married, where we, a few years ago, were looking at only standalone hotels. We're now looking at multi-use concepts. We're looking at many different activities on a site, aligning those, marrying them, making sure that the operators or the users are extracting full value, competent and qualified, and at the same time, taking the full view of the asset, the life cycle, the exit strategy, and realizing that value wherever in that chain it occurs.
I will actually extend that to the remaining panel.
To add on to what Naim and Harry said, is asset management is where you look at the owner's priorities first. Then you look at what time of the life cycle you are part of, and accordingly, diligently get the best value out of the asset for your owners or shareholders.
Rabih, you agree?
Yeah, I mean, asset management is performance management, and the most important element here is that we're here to make sure that that operator is doing the best possible job for that asset, and that's what asset management is.
So again, multiple views. My personal view is actually even simpler. It's just representing the best investment strategy on behalf of ownership and what they're realizing that. So to drill down a bit further, we haven't seen yet a general acceptance of asset management. It's very predominant in the US and in Europe. We now have professional associations like HAMA who are advocating the cause of asset management with significant members in the audience. Then we have our panel, last few years, more attention on asset management. But still there is a predominant focus on owner's representative. Now, Amit, I'll start with you. What is the difference between an owner's representative and a professional asset manager?
For me, owner's representative is somebody who represents the owner by way of looking at the bookkeeping values of the asset. It's somebody who looks at the in and outs with regards to the P&L, but not the balance sheet. And is somebody who is very comfortable with the owner from a relationship perspective, and the trust factor is there. And that's, for me, what an owner's representative is. An asset manager, for me, is somebody who takes this job and enhances it, but is somebody who is multi-skilled, who wears different hats depending on what it is all about. So he wears the operator's hat when he's working with the operators and dealing with them, understands them, works with them. He wears the banker's hat when he's looking at the financing, restructuring, and other financial objectives, be it the return on investment and asset enhancement or whatever it is all about. He wears the owner's rep hat in understanding the relationship of what the wants, desires are of the owner with respect to the asset. And this is where the asset manager fulfills the role.
So much more of a skilled professional approach.
Definitely.
And targeted approach. Rabih, what would you add
Well,
to that?
the owner's rep fulfills the owner's obligations in the management agreement, right? When we're talking about owners and operators. Typically, we also see owners' reps who look after multiple elements for that particular owner, not just hotels. So hotels, a factory somewhere, other real estate, and so they're the owner's rep for that owner's business, and they need an asset manager to assist them with that, with looking after the hotel asset.
Harry, would you agree?
The asset manager sits at the interface of several different interests. There's the owner's interest, there is the objectives of the brand, and there is the wider arena in which the asset operates to produce insight rather than data, to produce knowledge and expectation going forward. These are key deliverables for an owner. For the owner to understand what is going on and why. For the operator to understand the expectations put on them. So it's a communication role as well as all these technical aspects.
And time he hears, like, why do we need an asset manager? We've got an operator, we've got an owner's rep, we know our business, we've been doing this for 20, 30 years. Naim, you are owner and operator for some really beautiful properties. Would you agree with your colleagues?
Look, I do, and just to answer your initial question about why do we need asset management, I think the game is becoming very complex, and I think we need specialists in the game who are immersed into the industry, not only owner's rep and executing what's in the HMA, but people who actually understand the business, who can influence the business, who understand the strategy of the business from an operation as well as finance, as well as return on investment. And that's where the complexity comes in. So you need an industry person who ticks all of the boxes, who oversees the operation of the business aligned with the owning company's objectives.
Harry, he mentions HMA. I know you've got very strong viewpoints on HMA, but isn't that in the interest of the operator to ensure that the interest of the owner is represented?
The successful HMA is concluded in vigorous discussion and then hopefully put to one side and everybody gets on with the job in hand. The relationship should deliver common understanding, and from both sides there is an assessment as you go into a HMA that it is A, long-term, and it is B, a real sort of partnership thing. There are dangers where you have developers who know that, for instance, dealing with a contractor on a short-term contract, the use of the contract is quite vigorous and maybe confrontational. It's a bit of an exposure if you start to use those kinds of attitudes in dealing with hotel brands, because the hotel brand is committing with you to the long-term success, and you need to strike a different balance with them and a more genuine sharing of values. And the success of the relationship, obviously, is the success of the business and the top performance of the asset.
Amit, you've done many HMAs.
My opinion would be that the HMAs have not evolved as much as the business has evolved. We are still working with HMAs that, one, we might have inherited it, so it's already 10 years old and there's another 30 years to go. But in the last 10 years, we know we went from a development cycle, a very strong development cycle and a pipeline, to a phase wherein we are getting very stressed with the rates, and all the KPIs or the feasibility studies that were done at that time do not translate into the business today. So definitely the HMA, which was structured and which was agreed upon at that time, is not applicable today. And this is my challenge today with the HMAs, is that they do not keep so much of the owner's priorities in mind, keeping the longevity of these HMAs.
Rabih, is that changing, or are we...
It is. I mean, we're seeing operators come to the table with a lot of interesting ways of doing things. We're seeing fee forfeiture in some extent. You know, if they don't meet certain hurdles or certain performance metrics, we're looking at, we're taking back a lot of control. I know generally people are not happy with these management agreements, but operators are moving slowly towards what we're asking them to do. There's a lot of competition on all these properties. Listen, if you have a property, a 100-key property in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to get anything. But if you have a nice 400 room property in a prime location, yes, you can work something out. So yes, they are coming to the table.
Naim.
More of a reason for asset management, to make sure that we challenge these HMAs that are in place, make sure we enforce what's right for both parties and align the outcome.
But isn't that the operator's job?
Look, like any business, operators sometimes can have different objectives. And I think as asset owners, we need to make sure that the asset's being sweated to the maximum capacity, as I started saying. And not to say that operators aren't always aligned, but it does happen. And because these HMAs have a license of 20, 30, 40 years, a lot of things happen in the course. Hence, we need to challenge them and realign them constantly.
So one of our principal roles is to bring in the balance between the operator, the owner, the investment, the asset. Is that a good analysis, Harry? Feel free.
The questions that have been asked in other sessions on this conference have been, what is the role of the brand in the age of the OTA? Is one at the cost of another? How does it affect the relative position? Sometimes brands have to invest themselves in the brand positioning so that the brand, when it comes to the street, has credibility. Hotels have been lost because although the investment was made by the owner, the brand didn't have that credibility relative to its competition. And it's really a function of the asset manager to understand that dynamic, to understand what else is happening in the overall environment you're operating in, and make sure that the brand is delivering for you. It's not just the rate that day-to-day you get, but the relative positioning and strength of your business to all the other competitive offers. And those others are also opportunities for the owner. I have changed a brand off of a hotel, not because the performance was particularly poor in comparison to its immediate comp set, but because the brand was going nowhere. The brand had lost steam with its own mentors, with its own brand owners. And so to have that assessment, to have that insight as to whether the dynamic is still in the owner's favor, and at what point in time on this long, long cycle, you need to take a position. That is something where that insight is being fed back to the owner from that interpretation of what's happening in the market.
So why are we not seeing more of that? The US model is very predominant. There are hardly any transactions.
It's basically an agreement with American NDA. What we have here is a culture which is fundamentally non-confrontational. We have a uncertainty in terms of how you value properties because land values are a little bit of a question mark. And we have environments where hotels don't want necessarily, not hotels, owners don't want necessarily to make an issue, don't want to go to court. As you have seen sort of in the rest of the world, the legalistic environment on one hand is much more confrontational, but it does sometimes solve problems which, if you're not going that way, are allowed to further develop and compound.
Rabih and Amit, you've been your entire life in this part of the world, and you've actively part of the asset management process. Ròya's got tremendous assets. Amit, you've seen a lot of movement. Do you foresee the future an increase of asset management acceptance or general practices?
Definitely. We evolve. We understand the needs, wants, desires of these market and the market conditions as and when they move forward. And one of the key aspects is that the owners need support and guidance in the life cycle of these assets. There is increased competition, there is more compression of the rates, and this is just going to get stronger the way we move forward. Asset management gives you, or the asset manager gives you the comfort space, the understanding, the guidelines, how to bridge the delta between what you're achieving and what you could be achieving. And this is only going to get stronger the way the pipeline is moving forward.
But there is a cost for asset management. There's a cost.
It's a perceived cost in the end of the day. We live in the age of internet when today your marketing budget and cost, earlier you used to have a marketing manager and everything else. Today you have a marketing manager, you have somebody who manages social media, et cetera, and these are all adding on the cost. But they also bring in a revenue perspective. They manage your costs as well. And keeping this in mind, an asset manager does this in a much more efficient and proficient way.
Rabih?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we are seeing a lot of requests. We're seeing a lot of interests in asset management and having owners look into this type of thing, seeking advice, whether it's on a regular basis or a one-off situation. We are doing a lot of work with owners of multiple hotels. Some owners, we have an ownership group who has 11 hotels, and they've decided to outsource that to us. The risk, however, is that owners are becoming more and more in tune with what's happening in the industry, and perhaps, I would say maybe 10, 15 years from now, they will know how to run these hotels and how to asset manage these hotels by themselves. And this could be something that happens.
René, I think furthermore what I'd like to add is the market is maturing and there is a market correction from rate, ADR, RevPAR, and I think this is where a lot of the owners are looking at themselves saying, I need help to make sure my returns are matching what I used to have, because obviously the equations have changed. And this is where the role of asset management is becoming a lot stronger today, because there is that varsity of returns.
I agree. I think the word maturing is a very important word currently. Would you advocate for an in-house or third-party asset management?
Look, personally, I always, again, depending on the scope of the role, depending on the complexity of the actual unit, the business, I'm a believer that in-house you'd get a lot more mileage because they're focused, they're aligned, and they're part of the equation. But again, depends on the scope of the actual business.
And also the reach. I mean, that depends on the business, obviously. Harry, in terms of third-party or in-house, what are the advantages and disadvantages?
There are obviously scale issues. If you only have one or two hotels, your ability to access comparable data is somewhat limited. It's what you can buy or pick up colloquially. With a third-party asset manager who has a broad spectrum of different units, different data sets, you do get a stronger benchmark base. And it's not just on revenues, it's also on all the other aspects, benefits. Obviously, payroll is a huge cost. So insight into exactly how a market is performing and responding on payroll costs and total brand cost, which includes not only the fees, but also all these discretionary charges, mandatory charges, other costs which are related to maybe some sort of back office functionality. Going forward, the move to clusters, the move to cloud computing will take much more consolidation out of the property. Where is that consolidation happening? How is that ownership situation? Do you now own the ability to run your business? So a lot of these pushbacks or balancing acts between cost creation and accountability, between IP issues and other sort of related items cannot be handled by an individual owner talking to a brand. The brands are monolithic. The brands are much larger than the owner, usually. So how you have the right kind of pressure points and the right kind of identified items and issues to push back on, that needs that overall technical background.
Now, an important element we haven't mentioned here or before is actually the role of an asset manager on the strategic level. strategic advice. Rabih, we briefly mentioned that also one of the true values of an asset manager is that, especially third-party asset manager, is that reach that they have. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, when you have the scope and the breadth of properties as a third-party asset manager and dealing with different ownerships, dealing with different markets, that definitely adds value to an owner. I mean, we don't work off of reports. We have live data from last night. So it's different. I mean, again, horses for courses. If you're a Maddad al-Futtaim, you don't need a third-party asset manager. You can, you do it in-house. But when you're talking about individual owners who have 1, 2, 3, 4 assets, it's definitely something that where a third-party asset manager can add value.
Amit.
Personally, I feel an in-house asset management team adds value. There's a comfort element with the owners, especially within the region, as well as it's a more focused approach with the owners here. With regards to the data set, other touch points, today we are moving forward. There is a lot of data available in the market, offline or online, and which sort of assists you in doing your job better. And it's a personal opinion that the in-house focus is much stronger.
I'd like to move this discussion also towards the sustainability and asset management. We had yesterday our annual general meeting for HAMA, where we had invited as a dear friend and keynote speaker Sonu from Soneva, who is one of the leaders of sustainability. Then also from Costa Rica, two very valuable friends, good friends, as we had the pleasure to attend the first sustainable investment conference in Costa Rica just last November. The region, we talk about sustainability. We talk about LEED certification. We talk about green initiatives, but we're not leaders there yet. How do you foresee that, and how, as professional asset managers, how do you incorporate that in your decision making? Naim.
Look, there is a global movement on the sustainability front, and I think as an industry, we owe it to the next generation, to Mother Earth, to make sure that we align ourselves moving forward. Nonetheless, it comes with a cost. And again, part of the asset management, we need to outweigh the positives and the negatives. But I think it's a no-brainer. It has to happen, and the sooner we engage, the sooner we learn more, and the sooner we give back, the better.
Is it cost effective, Harry, to be sustainable?
Very definitely. One of the key concerns that we will always take as asset managers is life cycle management. And that means that the protection of existing asset and the full maintenance and replacement and upgrading with the latest technologies is part and parcel of what should normally be expected. That itself is a positive aid in sustainability. We have, for instance, I think all hotels over the last already many years implemented full LED light systems wherever we possibly can, motion sensors and things like that. So that's part of what we do, and I would call that a strong part of sustainability and protection of the environment.
Rabih, with your clients, and do you feel that movement towards sustainability?
As long as it's commercially viable, yes. We get asked by government entities to participate in workshops on behalf of owners, generally on behalf of owners, where we're pushing back. We are pushing back on certain things that are still not commercially viable today. A lot of things are being put through the system to make them more mandatory for investors to, such as, a lot of these recycling programs and with the waste management. There's a lot coming.
It's not mainstream yet.
I can't talk about a lot. I just remembered that I can't talk a lot about it because the new law is going to be passed, I think, in the next couple of weeks, specifically in Dubai. And yeah.
Thank you. We're coming to a close. Just one last question for the group. Is asset management here to stay? Amit?
Definitely. Definitely. It's the way forward.
Harry?
I was in Shanghai 3 weeks ago. And what has happened there is that asset management has been seen as the heart of the ownership position. And the asset management functionality within hospitality conferences was seen as absolutely central. And it's the interface between the different interests and the long-term benefit of both the asset and the business it represents. And the Chinese have got it, and they're taking it away.
So that's yes.
All those major, and they are very, very large companies that own a very large number of hotels, all have asset management disciplines at the heart.
Amit? Oh, sorry, Naim?
It's not only here to stay, I think it's the future, it's now, it's moving forward. And like any asset, someone needs to take care of the asset. Someone who understands the asset, someone who can monitor the daily activities, someone who can challenge every aspect of the asset, including operators, that is, and keep asking for more because it's an evolving industry and we need to drive it from the heart.
Rabih, and we need local involvement. We need people coming up within asset management who are going to take it forward from a national basis.
Is it interesting? It's really boring. Come on, who wants to asset manage hotels, right? No, obviously it's a dynamic industry. There's a lot of growth, and it's the future again.
Thank you very much. Thank you to them.
Thank you. This leads me to two things.
Thanks.
Firstly, please join me in a round of applause for all our panelists and all our moderators.